Jesus said, fear no one. And twice more in the gospel he says, do not be afraid. Specifically, he was saying about us that we are not to fear those who would try to prevent us from living our faith and speaking out our faith, from standing up for what is right. Don't let somebody else scare us into living less than who we are and are called to be, to living out our faith. There's a specific example for that in the first reading from the book of the prophet Jeremiah. This is chapter 20, and if you want to read it, an even more intense account, read the whole chapter. But in right in here, Jeremiah is saying there's whisperings by many. And he says, terror on every side. Denounce. Let us denounce him. That's what he's hearing. Let us wait for a misstep so we can trap him. We're going to get him. That's what they're saying. You heard that about yourself, wouldn't you be a little bit afraid? In fact, I am confident that at least some of us have been in those kinds of situations where it seems like everybody's against us, especially if it's in the family. And some of Jeremiah's family was out to get him too. Because what he was doing was he was speaking God's word. All I'm doing is telling you what God told me to tell you. Well, they didn't like it because it was calling them to a change and challenging how it is that they lived. And so they were out to get him. And I suspect some of us at least have been in those kinds of situations. It's difficult. And then Jeremiah goes on to say, he says, but the Lord is with me like a mighty champion. And if you're practical, real practical, you might say, yeah, nice, but does that mean that he's going to take care of all my enemies? He'll change their mind, or all of a sudden they'll be out of my life and I have nothing to fear anymore because they're gone? Well, obviously not. It didn't work for Jeremiah. For example, later on in that chapter, he says, cursed the day I was born. I mean, it was pretty intense for him. But he goes on to say, but the Lord is with me as a mighty champion. Well, how does that help? It helps because in order to face fear, we need courage. And the word courage comes from two Latin words, which is cor, meaning heart, and agere, which means to act. So courage means the heart to act. So when he is praising God and blessing him, he is saying, I trust in God. And in saying that, it gave him the heart to continue doing what he needed to do, to stand up against sin and all that was going wrong, and to speak the truth as he knew it from God. He had the heart to act. God strengthened his heart. He doesn't take away necessarily those things which are coming upon him, but it gives him the strength and the heart to stand in the midst of it. And that's what trust in God can do. Found a story which I think brings that out. It's about a woman named Catherine Lay. The story is in Catholic Digest a few years ago. But anyway, she had cancer, and it was just after her surgery, the chemo treatments began. So every morning she would comb her hair, she would pull out another clump of hair in her brush. The side effect was hitting it harder than she expected. One morning, she felt the top of her head. For the first time, she could count the strand. I can do that every morning, by the way. But she felt strangely at peace. She held each strand, just as God in his providence could count them from the moment God breathed his life into her. She became aware of God's presence in the love of her family and friends who were supporting her and suffering with her. She remembers, I felt comfort knowing that God knew how many strands were in my brush, on my pillow, my hat and in my hand. God had counted them all. With or without my hair, God knew me and what my future held. I was still afraid of the cancer, of the chemo, the upcoming brain scan and its results, but I knew that God would be with me through it all. That faith in God can strengthen our heart, give us the heart to act. It doesn't mean we won't be afraid. It means that we will have strength in the midst of it. In fact, fear is not a bad emotion. As all emotions, they're neutral. They're just there. So if Jesus says, don't fear, it's like, well, I can't help it. I'm afraid. I'm feeling it. So really what it means is don't let fear get the best of you. Because fear is a good thing when it alerts us to danger and alerts us to be ready to fight or to flee. In fact, Jesus did both. I remember the time he was in the temple. They picked up rocks to throw at him. It says he hid in the temple and snuck out. He's smart. Another time in the Garden of Gethsemane, where they came for him, he's still afraid. He prayed God to let this go away. I don't want it. But he stood there and faced it. Heart to act. Fear can be a good thing, but let us know when to get out or when to stand up. The deal is that not to let it get the best of us, and that could be the negative part of our reaction to fear. We fold, we freeze, we are overcome by it, and we're afraid to go and do something else. But it is our faith in God which can help us to get by that, to understand what Jesus said in the gospel this morning. He says, not even a sparrow drops to the earth without your Father knowing it, and you're worth more than many, many sparrows. There's nothing that goes on in our life that God doesn't know, and where he is not with us. If we believe, we can then know and carry with us that strength of our heart that God is there and is there indeed. And when that happens, when we feel the fear, which we will feel at recurring times throughout our life, we don't have to be frozen or overcome by it. But rather, God gives us the strength to face what we need to face. He gives it to us in our prayer, and he gives it to, as we heard, the people who support us. All right, I can do this. People believe in me. Okay. God's with me. Okay. Talks about all our fears really then, not just those when we are facing opposition, but facing something which is difficult. I found another story perhaps which I think speaks to this. About a long time there lived a little boy whose parents had died, and he was taken by an aunt to raise him as her own child. Years later, after he had grown up and left his aunt, he received a letter from her. She had a terminal illness, and from the tone of the letter, he knew that she was afraid of death. The man whom she had raised and touched wrote her a letter in which he said, "It is now 35 years since I, as a little boy of 6, was left quite alone in the world. You sent me word that you would give me a home and be a mother to me. I've never forgotten the day when I made the long journey of 10 miles to your house. I can still recall my disappointment when, instead of coming for me yourself, you sent your servant Caesar to fetch me. I will remember my tears and my anxiety as, perched high on your horse and clinging tight to Caesar, I rode off to my new home. Night fell before we finished the journey. As it grew dark, I became even more afraid. Do you think she'll go to bed before I get there? I asked Caesar anxiously. Oh no, said Caesar. She's sure to stay up for you. When we get out of these woods, you'll see her light shining in the window. Presently we did ride out into the clearing, and there was your light. I remember that you were waiting at the door, that you put your arms tight around me, that you lifted me, a tired, frightened little boy, down from the horse. You had a fire burning in the hearth and a hot supper waiting on the stove. After supper, you took me to my new room, heard me say my prayers. Then you sat with me until I fell asleep. You are probably wondering, you probably realize why I'm trying to recall this to your memory now. Very soon, God is going to send for you, take you to a new home. I'm trying to tell you that you needn't be afraid of the summons, or of the strange journey, or of the dark messenger of death. God can be trusted. God can be trusted to do as much as for you as you did for me so many years ago. At the end of the road, you'll find love and a welcome waiting, and you'll be safe in God's care. I'm going to watch and pray for you till you're out of sight. And then I shall wait for the day when I make the same journey myself and find you waiting at the end of the road to greet me. Here will be a recurring motion, experience throughout our lives. It doesn't have to debilitate us. Our faith in God, the ways that God works to others, strengthen our hearts enough to act and face the fear.